thoughts about creativity. I've been in creative fields my whole life, my whole career.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a mine there, and I can delve as deeply as I, need to in that mine. And so I thought, well, what if Little Oracles, its next iteration, was a podcast about creativity?
As you might guess, when I start an interview, I can never anticipate what the tone will be or even everything that we're going to cover in this conversation. So what you're about to listen to is me and Allison Arth dive into the very nature of creativity. What we talk about transcends just creating games or a podcast. We discuss what creating means and the barriers between you and your creativity. I knew as we were recording this that this was going to become a very meaningful conversation. You see, Allison has become a good friend, and you will hear the basis of our friendship emerge from this episode. Our conversation continues in an upcoming episode of her podcast. It's set to drop in the next few weeks in August of 2023, so follow me on the socials for the alert, or even better, sub her podcast, Little Oracles, so that you can catch us talking some more. Her podcast is one of my favorites, and you will hear why in this conversation. Make sure you stick around to the end when we discuss music and media and how it ties to the creative process. The patrons on the Third Floor War Patreon bring you this episode. A quick thanks to the newest members and floor heads: Maxime Ridderette, Harmony Bat, Troy Banks, Kevin Greenlee, Michael S. Miller, Jay Fabel 3, Jake at Faded Quill Gaming, Harry Ravenkiller, and Ryan Greenlee. Okay, sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Allison.
Hi, this is Sean Nittner. When I'm not stewarding Big Bad Con and trying to figure out how to get more rooms on Thursday nights for our guests, you can find me listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today I sit down with Allison Arth. She is a writer, musician, creator of the Western Cantos Poetry RPGs, including The Gentleman Bandit, and the host of the Little Oracles podcast. Now, she wore out 4 tapes of the Footloose soundtrack between 1985 and 1998. She runs a small-scale American food lab in her home kitchen and, unironically, loves Ethel Merman and regional wax museums. One of the better intros I've been given, Allison. Welcome to the Third Floor.
Oh, Craig, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So before we started recording, listeners, I think Allison and I have already spent like 45 minutes talking. And one of the things that we've talked about is between, having a common friend in John Harper and, just communicating on Twitter and stuff, we feel like we've already had this interview, but we should probably record it at this point.
It'd be good for the posterity.
Exactly. So there's a rumor that you've listened to the podcast, so you know what's coming. There was a day where you knew nothing about role-playing games, and then it was put in front of you for the first time. Can you take me back there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a day that was not too far in the distant past, to be honest with you. Yeah, I think most people of my generation and perhaps older, I kind of grew up with a lot of board games, playing with the family and with friends and things like that. And I played video games too. We had Atari 2600 when I was a kid. I'm sure you had one of those too.
Yep.
And graduated to the Nintendo franchise and all that kind of thing. So I played video games with my older brother and did all of that. And I only kind of knew about role-playing games like peripherally. And they never seemed like they were like my thing, like they were for me necessarily, because I don't know, they just seemed a little too nerdy, Craig.
And they were. I mean, I talk about that all the time, that it was not, I mean, it wasn't until I came back to the hobby like 4 years ago that I realized like, oh, we can tell people now that we do this.
Right. Exactly. And, I felt like I had, cooler things to do when I was in high school, like, teach myself HTML to build Jeff Goldblum tribute websites and things like that.
Much cooler.
Way cooler. Playing in the high school pep band, those kinds of things. Awesome stuff like that. So I actually never played a role-playing game until I was an adult. And it was in summer 2012 that I was working at a creative agency, and some of the guys on the creative team with me had started playing a role-playing game that in my world I understood was probably Dungeons and Dragons, because that's the only one I knew of at the time. And they kept asking me and they kept saying, hey, you should play, you should play, you should play. You'd love this. And I was like, guys, come on. No, I don't want to be part of this. You can do your little nerdy thing. And finally, they kind of wore me down and I came and sat in. And a couple of the guys were super nice. They helped me fill out my character sheet. I made this cool like ranger rogue type. And it was this thing that I just really didn't understand what was about to happen. Mm-hmm. And our GM started the game by doing this kind of previously on scenario and started building this world and building this atmosphere of this sunken city and these demons who were all about and these seedy underworld people who were giving our team a hard time. And he started creating all of these opportunities for adventure and to do cool stuff. And I was absolutely hooked. I was so excited. It was such an exciting moment to just be part of that world. Mm-hmm. And because I had no idea that this is what a role-playing game was. I had no idea that I was going to be immersed and that I was going to have all of these opportunities to stab a guy with a Coma knife and like take him hostage and get our money from him and stuff like that. You know, these kinds of, that I was going to be able to adopt a dog. I got a dog in the game and he was my best friend. And so I was absolutely hooked and I wanted to come back every week. And it was so much fun in this little kind of homebrew D&D style thing.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And then we ended up, playing through the campaign and, the last session, the three of us shattered the gates of death and blotted out the sun. And
why is it every D&D campaign ends with the sun dying?
It was real bad. But then we kind of started a new game. And I should not be so cagey, but our GM was John Harper, so I had a nice easy entry into playing role-playing games with someone who had done it for so long.
Yeah. Now, at that point, obviously, so you guys were working at the same agency at that point?
Yeah, we were.
So did you only know John within the creative realms of the agency, or had you known that he had this secret life?
I did kind of know he had the secret life because the person who hired me, the chief creative officer, he was kind of giving me the pitch when he wanted me to come on the team. And he was like, and one of our people writes role-playing games. And I was like, that doesn't sell me. But I get that that's cool for you, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, I only knew that. I only knew that that he had written them, and I had no idea what it really was like. And it was just an eye opener, and I loved it.
So you actually have two origin stories in my mind, because we got the role playing origin story, and when you're exposed to that, and you've created some pretty neat games.
Thank you.
But your other origin story is your love of reading and your love of literature.
Yeah.
So imagine that wasn't starting 10 years ago. When did you first discover oh my God, you're like my wife, just a voracious reader?
I was probably, I've written stories for my whole life. I was really into, I grew up in this town, this very small town, but there was a thing called the Young Authors Conference in our town. And it was kind of this age bracketed thing where kids could go for a day and you wrote a little book and you illustrated it and you put it on a table and people read them.
That's
and
cool.
There were, authors that came in and did readings, and you could take little breakaway classes. Like I learned how to do calligraphy one time and things like that. I think they gave you lunch, but it was a really nice little weekend day. And so I was always kind of writing stories and thinking about stories. And then I remember very specifically when I was 7, I was home. I was at the babysitter's because my parents were both school teachers. And so I had to go to the babysitter's because I had the flu or something. And I'm in this giant Barca lounger at my babysitter's house, and her 2 dogs are next to me. And she asks me if I want to watch TV. She asks me if I want to listen to the radio, and I didn't want to do anything. And so she said, I've got something for you. And she brought me Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And I had never really read a novel of that kind before. And I read it in a day while I had the flu. So I was probably delirious. That added to my excitement for this book. But that was it for me. That was it. And I just couldn't stop since then.
She is often talked about as being, an author for young teen girls and stuff like that. I loved those books.
Oh,
as a kid, loved those books because she does a really great job of like, there's still some adventure in there, right?
Yes.
So like I don't know, it's like 10 or 11 when I read them. And I only read like 4 or 5, but there was enough adventure in there for the little, budding hormone kid I was at the time. But she does just such a good deal with the complexity of the family.
Yes, absolutely.
So good. So I asked this of my wife because my like I said, my wife is I'm a reader, but I'm not a reader like capital R, right? So my wife is a reader. And I've asked my wife this question. I'm going to ask you the same question, which is, when did you realize you weren't like everybody else? When did you realize because let's be honest, like there's people that read books and then there's people who are readers. And when did you realize, like, I think I read a lot more than other people?
Well, I think that part of that is when someone asks me, oh, what are you reading or what have you read lately? And I just don't know what to tell them anymore because there's just so many things. And I feel like I want to engage in that kind of librarian brain to be like, okay, you're asking me what I'm reading or if I've enjoyed anything lately. And that's really a question about, can you recommend anything to me?
Right.
Like, people want to know what other people are experiencing. I mean, you do this on this podcast all the time, right? You want to know because you want to have that experience too. And so whenever that kind of question comes up, I always want to probe further and be like, hey, okay, so what is it about a book that you love? What kind of storytelling do you like? What kind of lyricism in the text do you like? Are you a poetry fan? Are you an adventure fan? Like, do you like character? Do you like drama? What are the parameters so that I can better like talk about something that is exciting to me? And we can have I think, more robust conversation in that way. But I think that's it. I think that is a huge part of it. And really, like when I was, working at the agency and working in like full-time jobs and stuff, I'm an independent creator at this point, but I just didn't have as much time to read. So the reading has really ramped up over the last like several years that I've been an independent creator. And it just fuels me, like if I'm going to write something, I'm going to read something first. Because,
how so?
Because it's just, it's not necessarily because I need the juice to do some kind of facsimile or I need something that is going to give me an idea about something that I specifically want to do, but having all of those inputs and seeing how other writers express their ideas and express their character and express setting and seeing how they, handle plot and seeing how they handle relationships. It's just loam, and I can dig into it and find my own way through something that I'm working on. I think it's so critical for any creator to just kind of experience other creative work. Yeah. Because otherwise you just kind of clamp down and you get tunnel vision in a way.
When you're reading, and I don't think this is probably a simple question with I'm sure a complex answer, but when you're reading, do you find yourself wearing separate hats at different times? Like, are you sometimes reading as an academic where you're going, oh, that's very interesting how she's calling back to this in this book. And that was a nice tie in there. And, oh, great use of this word. Or is it like, do you just get lost in it and think with that hat later? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of how you consume a book now because of your, being a writer and your viewpoint and, you've read so many things.
Yeah, I definitely think I have kind of parallel tracks running in my head all the time. There are some books that I definitely I'm just devouring, that I'm like, oh, what's going to happen next? What are they going to do? Oh my God, and I think I have that more. This is interesting. I think I have that more so when I'm listening to audiobooks because I listen to a lot of books.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh,
why do you think that is? That's super interesting.
Because I'm not seeing it on the page, right? Like I'm not seeing the structural limitations of the words on a page. I'm just hearing a story or I'm hearing a memoir. I read a lot of memoir in audiobook form because it's just, it's just somebody talking about their life.
Right.
And it's like a podcast in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a different format, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is that, that's different. It's different between a novel and a comic book.
Absolutely.
Both are on print, and but they're two different ways to tell a story and the stuff. I hadn't really thought about that. And it's funny because when you're saying that, like there's certain books I can't listen to.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. And a lot of times it has, like, I can listen to memoirs. I can listen to nonfiction. Fiction, for whatever reason, I need to read. And I wonder if it's for the same reasons.
This is something that I thought about myself too. And then I just started reading fiction in an audiobook form. And I was like, I can do this. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It works really well for me. And, a lot of times I will read an audiobook and then while I'm reading the book physically too. And that gives me kind of a new perspective, especially when I'm reading poetry, honestly, because a lot of poets record their audiobooks. So you hear the poets, cadence, and you hear their timbre, and you hear the way that they express a line while you're reading it on the page. And sometimes those things are actually reflected in the layout of a poem too. So that's always a really beneficial experience for me. But yeah, I used to not read fiction, and then I just started, and I was like, yes, I can listen to a story while I'm doing the dishes.
It's a really interesting point, because I've never listened to poetry. Well, that's not true. I've never listened to like an audiobook of poetry, but I should, because I remember in college, there was a short period of time where I thought I was going to be a lawyer, which means you do political science and English, right? When you're an undergrad. So I started taking English classes, and one of the two big revelations that happened to me as an undergrad was hearing poetry performed for the first time. I didn't see, like, we would read it out loud in class in high school, but that's different, right?
That's really different.
Yeah. And it's just, it made me get poetry.
Yeah.
And when I say get it, like, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why this is a BFD, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a whole total experience. The other thing was Shakespeare. Read Shakespeare in high school, just did nothing for me. And then in college, I saw Shakespeare perform for the first time, and I'm like, holy shit.
I feel like that is one of those crucible moments for just about everyone when they see it on stage and they suddenly hear the poetry of it. And it is so vastly different from, doing the radio play when you're in 6th grade of Romeo and Juliet and is a really bad Romeo. Not that happened to me or anything. I probably shouldn't say his name. What if he listens to this? A certain boy.
You guys heard the beep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just it is a completely different experience. The oral and the reading it, the aisle, the ocular.
Yeah. It is. And the other thing that I'm starting to get comfortable too, and I'll be curious if you wrestle with this, is I'm just now getting comfortable with a Kindle.
Oh, yeah. I don't have one.
Yeah, I struggled.
Yeah.
I struggled. My wife had to do it out of necessity because there's only so many shelves in my house.
Yeah.
In our house, right? And I'm like, honey, like this has to stop. And that's coming from a guy who has an entire floor in his house devoted to games. So when I'm telling her she's going a little too far, like it's a situation. And she jumped right in. She has a million books and reads on her Kindle. And she got me one. And I don't know. I like the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I have never ventured into the e-reader specifically. I do read occasionally on an iPad, but it's a hard sell for me. And I think that might be just the blue light issue, but I don't know
what that means.
Well, like the light from the screen is just a little bit too, intense.
Too much strain.
A little too much strain after reading for a while, but yeah, I love holding the book. But you know what? There's also libraries, and that's a wonderful thing that we can check out these books from our local library. It's a beautiful institution, and everyone should have a library card.
I agree. And my wife is great about the library, but that doesn't stop her from buying books.
I know.
To be clear, I'm not complaining because I have no leg to stand on. She has something she loves and she spends money on it. I'm the same way.
Yeah.
And unlike me, I buy books, role-playing books that I probably may not ever read, let alone play.
Right.
She reads everything.
Wow.
Yeah. I have dyslexia, so I'm a slow reader.
Okay.
And I watch her tear. Like she will read 400 pages in a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not just like sitting on the couch all day and reading it. She'll be doing other stuff, but she's just, it's amazing to me. Super envious.
Well, we all have our, the things that we love to do and the things that we have the capacity to do. So I think that if you're reading anything, I think that's great. Whether you're reading it on a Kindle or a book or you're listening to it, reading is reading, and it's a beautiful thing.
Now, from a creative aspect, it sounds like the writing piece came very early, like that was fostered as a child, but you only being in the role-playing game world for a very relative short period of time. When did you think I want to try making a game?
The year is 2015. And John's Kickstarter for Blades in the Dark is rolling on. And we were watching Deadwood and having a pizza or something. And I said to him, hey, I have this idea. What if Blades in the Dark, but a Western? And he said, okay, tell me more. And I said, what if it's a stretch goal? And so I kind of came up with this idea for this Blades hack called Sparrow's Folly, which is still in development, everyone. If you're still champing at that old bit to get Sparrow's Folly, it is currently in development. So I started writing kind of color copy for that and immersing myself in the Western genre, which is something that I absolutely love and have loved from a very young age, watching Bonanza with my dad,
What is it that draws you to the Western genre?
The voice, 100%. The voice, the lyricism, the ability to capture a landscape in a narrative and have that mean so much to the characters and to the thrust of the story. So, books like True Grit by Charles Portis, which is a beautiful character portrait of two people. I don't want to just talk about Rooster Cogburn here, but it is an incredible character portrait. And then there's some really beautiful modern Westerns, actually. I don't know if you're into the genre, but How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang is a beautiful modern Western about Chinese Americans in the American West.
Very cool.
One of my favorite books of a couple years ago, 2021, and Inland by Taya Obret and The Witch Way Tree by Elizabeth Crook. Just some really cool stuff. And, Annie Proulx is such a huge titan in that space, an amazing writer who's writing the Wyoming stories. She also wrote the Shipping News, if that rings any bells for anybody. But she has just an incredible way of capturing people and their roots in a place. And I am so enamored of that. So I have always just been really into what it is about the Western that says something about the people who are in a place. And it also is just a genre to me that is so ripe for reinvention. And that's kind of what these modern Westerns are doing, I think. This story, it's a colonialist story. It is a patriarchal story. It is a paternalistic story in all of its facets. And that, in a lot of ways, is very true to history. But I think there are ways to inhabit that world and that type of lyricism and language that aren't rooted necessarily in that history and that can kind of expose it and rework it and give it fresh meaning, kind of in the way Deadwood does, honestly, the HBO program, if people aren't familiar. So,
it's a good point. And I think Deadwood's a good example of this. And I've said this about fantasy and sci-fi, and I feel the same way about Western, which is I don't like to watch Westerns. What I like is I like to read into stories that are set in Westerns, right? In the same way, like if it's just a Western, it's not enough for me. And your example of True Grit is a perfect example of that. Like you could take that study of those two characters and you could set it in modern times. You could set it in the future. You could set it with dragons and swords and it would still work.
100%.
Now, it's best in the West for a lot of reasons, especially the dynamic between the two of them is very much enhanced by the situation that is truly, Western tropes. But I think that's a big thing for me. And Deadwood did that, right?
Yeah.
The storylines in Deadwood were all character driven.
Yep.
Could have been Northwest Seattle in the 80s, and you still could have told those stories.
Well, and speaking of Shakespeare, I mean, that is a Shakespearean show. If there's anything that's a Shakespearean
I've never thought about that.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, we have our kind of our aside character who, what's his name? I can't remember his name. The fellow who owns the hotel, and he is in Newhart. Anyway, I can't remember what his character name is, but he is always, giving his perspective on what's happening. He's kind of expounding in these really beautiful soliloquy ways. And there's all of these situations that are, we've got love triangles. We've got people who are having issues with other people. We've got fights. We've got all that stuff that Shakespeare just really ate up.
It's super messy.
It's super messy. It's Hamlet. It's Macbeth. It's all of these things where people are doing bad stuff to each other. And, the truth will out, maybe. Probably not, but it could.
It could. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creation. We've got a lot more to go with Allison covering all of that stuff. We'll be right back.
You like science fiction, right? You love playing games, maybe even role-playing games. But what if you can't get your friends together for a game night? If you love games like Mothership or Orbital Blues, check out Dead Belt, a card-based space western solo strategy RPG about skillful and desperate scavengers picking over the remains of junked starships in hopes of a juicy payday. In it, you deal with lurking dangers, push your luck, and walk away with enough cred to keep on flying. Of course, you might get eaten by lurking aliens, or run afoul of rival scavengers, or face the murderous ghosts of long-dead spacers. No one said life in the Dead Belt was going to be easy. For more information on this and all of Sean and Abby Drake's games, swing over to acoupleofdrakes.com. The link's in the show notes.
So we talked about, you creating games, and we found out that somebody who's still in your life was part of you finding the hobby itself, and we also talked about Westerns. So for those of you not familiar, I want to talk. I had to pick through a few games that you've put together, and I think this is the one that I wanted to talk about the most. It's called The Gentleman Bandit. And here's a little blurb. Gentleman Bandit is a solo role-playing game exploring violence, woe, and disassociation. It is part of the Western Cantos, a poetry RPG cycle. Now, before we dive into the origins and do my whole thing here, what is the Western Cantos and what is a poetry RPG cycle?
It's something I invented. So I think of the Western Cantos as a set of poetry-based role-playing games that are all of a piece in some way. They kind of all take place in the same universe or in different times in the same universe, but they all kind of inform one another in the way that they work together as poetry generating tools. So they can create cycles of poems, that is, connected poems with their gameplay. So that's kind of what a poetry RPG cycle is in my mind.
And each of them are connected but different, it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And was Gentleman Bandit the first?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Okay.
It was the very first one.
So there's a day where you just, it was nowhere in your brain. When does that start to tickle in the back of your head? When does this crazy concept start to form itself?
Yeah.
What did it look like?
It's actually I think it's a tree with a lot of roots, to be honest with you. So, so we've got the role-playing experience of what it is to play a role-playing game, and all of the bits and bobbles and having collaborative storytelling moments with people. And that's kind of bubbling around in my brain as something that exists in the world that I can participate in. And I'm thinking about Sparrow's Folly in this case. And I'm thinking about, how can I create a framework for people to have a good time and tell a cool story and be like cool, Western outlaw types. So there's that piece of it. And then there's also obviously the piece of Westerns that I love so much.
Yep.
And I was doing some, light reading on the internet about Western stuff. And I found in my research an article about a guy named Black Bart. Now, you may not have heard of Black Bart. I've
heard the name, but I know nothing about it.
Well, see, you probably you're thinking of the pirate, maybe. So there's a Black Bart pirate, but there's also a Black Bart outlaw.
Got it.
And this guy, his name is Charles Bowles, or he sometimes went by the alias Charles Bolton. And this is like the 1870s, 1880s in California. This guy leaves his family. He just disappears out of nowhere. And he shows up, or someone who is remarkably like him shows up in California and starts holding up stagecoaches and leaving poems behind.
Get out.
I am not kidding you. This is a real man. He left 2 authenticated poems behind. I guess there have been some copycats in the last 100-ish and 50 years, but he leaves these poems behind, and they're kind of like, rhyming couplets, like taunting, "Ooh, can you catch me, Mr. Policeman?" type stuff, And he then makes off with all of this money. He robs a few banks. He then disappears again, and no one knows what happened to him.
Never got caught.
Never got caught. Never ended up paying any of the money back. He just, poof, he disappeared.
That's interesting.
Right. And so I read this story and I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah.
This is a real guy, and he's leaving poetry at the sites of his misdeeds. How can I engage myself in this? And I thought, I could write an essay about it. I could write like a Medium post about it. I could write some poetry about it. I could do something with this historical thing. But then I started thinking, what if I could engage other people in this story as well?
Mm-hmm.
And what if I could get other people to be as excited about this as I am? And around this time, solo games had started to be kind of prominent on the itch marketplace. And particularly 2 of them. This is like early 2019. A cozy little game by Nadja Otikor, which is kind of an epistolary game. It's a letter writing thing where you're coming home after a long journey. And Plot Armor by Orion Black, which is a solo game where you kind of write the plot line of a mecha anime series.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so solo games are kind of becoming a thing. And all of those varying inputs, in addition to the fact that I want people to be able to feel like they can write poetry if they want to. Because it is a genre that so many people think is inaccessible. It's too highbrow. It has to be something that you go to school for. You have to, not be a certain type of person to do it, right? Like you have to have an identity as a poet.
Smoke a lot of cigarettes.
Smoke a lot of cigarettes. Smoke a lot of cigarettes. Wear a lot of black turtlenecks.
Right.
Play bongos, that kind of thing. So you have to participate in a world that doesn't exist. Like poetry is for everybody, right? And so all of these things kind of came together in my brain. And one morning in April of 2019, I woke up at like 3 a.m. and I was like, that's it. And I had my notebook by the bed and I scrawled these absolutely illegible notes about this game.
And did you always, so you're inspired by this idea, right? You find out about this gentleman bandit, and he's obviously he's renting a room in your head, right?
Oh yeah, for real.
Did you always know, because there's all kinds of paths here. You could have written a novel about him. You could have written a fictional account of him. You could have written poetry about him. Why the role-playing game?
Because I really just wanted people to know about this story and to have this experience. And it's not, the game itself isn't even really based in the story. It's not like there's a retelling of his life. It's just a fictionalized version of this dude. And the poems that you write in Gentleman Bandit are definitely different than the poems that he's writing. They're they can be a little weightier. They are, 13 lines long. It's like a broken sonnet, and it's just a very different experience. But you're participating in that idea of, I'm doing something that I know is probably wrong, and it's for reasons that are based in my personal trauma, and it's for reasons that are based in my personal grief. And there are definitely echoes of that in the work that he left behind. And I just really wanted it to be a game. I just really wanted it to be something that people could have fun with or cry about. I don't know.
Yeah. So let's say I play Gentleman Bandit, which I haven't done yet. And am I going to, for you to feel like you've done your job, would it be a bigger compliment for me to say, Allison, after playing Gentleman Bandit, I felt very inspired to write poetry, or I learned about poetry? Which of those would be a bigger compliment?
I think that's a false dichotomy, to be honest with you. Nice. I think that the biggest, the most gratifying thing is, and I've seen this so many times, and it makes my heart go 3 sizes when people, they say, I never thought I could write a poem.
Yeah.
And they did. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, It's just, they share their poetry with me. And if you write one poem with this game, you did it,
Yeah. Your work is done here.
Your work is done. And if you never write another poem again, cool. But you decided to take this time and to have this experience and to inhabit a character and to write in the voice of that character. And it is just like, that is gold, that is the profundity of human experience, right?
Yeah. And when I think about that, if it's something I've been intimidated to do, I would imagine when I don't know what the hell that means. I would imagine there's a certain level of liberation coming from the fact that I'm inhabiting another character, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's one of the critical elements too. And this is something that I talked a little bit about this on my podcast, which I know we're going to get into, but that is one of the things that helps democratize the art of poetry in a role-playing game. It gives people a way in that isn't so rooted in their personal experience and their personal traumas, because so many people come to poetry. The poet Denez Smith, they have this really great moment on one of their podcasts, the Verses podcast, where they say that poetry can be about those really kind of weighty emotions and those experiences of really difficult things, but it can also be about grilled cheese.
Right.
And that is it, like you can play a Western Canto's poetry game and you can write a story of some bandit that is a real ne'er-do-well, somebody who is shooting people up, somebody who is stealing, somebody who's hooting and hollering all over the town. And you can also write a gentleman bandit who is just kind of sad in his hotel room, counting his money and thinking, yeah, but this isn't as good as Rosie, who I left back in Jefferson City and I'll never see her again because she told me to leave. There are so many ways to inhabit that character and to express that character. And you're absolutely right. having that distance, I think, is so important.
Yeah. And it gives you that safety. And I think that ties into stuff. I don't know if I've directly talked about this yet on the podcast, but like the therapeutic nature of role-playing games, where it gives people safe areas to explore different things. It's not a surprise that you hear, it's not uncommon to hear people discovering their sexuality, discovering their true gender, discovering themselves after playing a role-playing game, because it gives you that freedom.
Yeah. I mean, I discovered that I was a nerd suddenly by playing role-playing games.
Like a capital N nerd, not a band nerd, not a book nerd, nerd.
I was so cool before that.
Oh, that's hilarious. So something that I find very interesting is, when do you stop? So you're inspired by this game. You work on this game. I'm sure you show it to because there's many people in your circle that create games, that are familiar with games. When do you stop? And when do you say, Gentlemen Bandit's done, and now I'm going to either do nothing else or I'm going to do something else? How do you stop?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little bit disappointing in this answer. I showed it to no one.
Really?
I wrote it in a fever in about 4 hours one day. And the day that I woke up at 3 a.m. and scribbled those illegible notes, and I wrote it and I sent it to John, and I was like, this is a game that I wrote. And he said, okay, I'm going to put it into layout.
No kidding.
I'm not kidding.
All right. Hold on a second. Wait a second. Did he just lay it out?
Yeah.
Or did he go, well, Allison, this is kind of like,
he didn't
wow.
He didn't touch it at all. It was a John Kennedy Toole Confederacy of Dunces scenario. It was just like this outpouring of exactly what I wanted, because I'd been thinking about this kind of structure and this idea for a long time, and all of these inputs were coming together and kind of crystallizing in my mind. And so I feel very, fortunate to have that experience of like, yes, I know this is what it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I've been a writer my whole life. I've been a career writer. I've been a creative director. Like I've had a lot of experience with projects, and that's something that's helped me understand, like, this is it. This is the thing it's going to be. And, not to like be super basic and quote Leonardo da Vinci or whatever, but I'm going to do it anyway. Art is never finished. It's only abandoned. Yeah. There's always room to grow. There's always room to change. There's always room for a second edition or a third or a fourth. D&D is like on, 12, 15. I have no idea. I truly have no idea. But there's
you're
always
a nerd
room
now.
to, yeah, right. I know everything about nerd stuff now. D&D episode 15. It's not an episode. See, this is how good I am at this.
Oh, that's funny. So guys, what we're going to do is we're going to take one more, actually, not one more break. We got 2 segments. I'm not going to let Allison get away that easy. And now, granted, I found out about this creation of Allison's before I found out about her games, and it was the initial reason why I wanted her to come on. So we're going to talk about this really cool little podcast. I'm going to say little because it's in the title. We're going to talk about little oracles. We'll be right back.
There are specific skills we use when we play a role-playing game. The better we are, the more fun it is for everyone at the table. Karen 12s and Friends wrote the 2nd edition of Improv for Gamers, so you can level up your play. The book helps you strengthen your storytelling skills, craft more exciting and multifaceted player characters and NPCs, and it also helps you know when and how to end a scene or share the spotlight with other players. The new edition for Improv for Gamers contains over a dozen new exercises, tips from experienced players, storytellers, and GMs, and advice for adapting the lessons for online play, accessibility, and your specific game and group. Evil Hat Productions is crowdfunding this right now on GameFound. I backed at the $25 level, and I'm getting the hardcover book, the PDF, and I'm also getting a chance to fund a community copy for itch. The digital pledge is only $15. So join me and take your table to a new level of fun. The campaign ends on May 5th, so click on the link in the show notes.
So I've got to tell you a secret.
Yes.
I got a little mad the first time I heard episode 1 of A Little Oracles. Part of the reason I got a little mad is because holy shit, you have an amazing radio voice.
Thank you, Craig.
You really do. You really do. And I guess I'm going to, before I get into like, had you done any voice work before? Like, or is this just how Allison does things? Like,
yes and no. I would say at this point, my main instrument is my voice. I am a singer. So,
there we go.
I've been singing my whole life and, shouting at the county fair and singing at the Matrix Coffee House in high school and stuff. And I guess I've kind of trained my voice in that way. I haven't taken voice lessons or anything, but when I used to record radio spots for my high school also, because I went to a very small high school, but I got tapped to, talk about what was coming up in boys basketball for the week and what the band was doing at the McDonald's and things like that.
So I did not know that you were a singer, and that helps a lot because because there's a tonality to your voice on the podcast, and there is a sense of timing that like I listened to, and like I said, I got mad. Because I feel like 4 years into this freaking podcast, I'm just starting to figure some of that shit out. And I'm like, God damn, like, this is our first freaking episode.
I also should say, so that you can maybe even be a little less mad, that when I was growing up, I was in theater, Craig. So
of course
I did theater things, and I was going to be on Broadway and all of that kind of thing. I had a big dream. And then I discovered like ancient Greek and Latin, and I was like, that shit's out the door. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I swear?
Yes, you can.
I should know that.
So you bounced hard off of that.
Yeah. Cause like Broadway is too nerdy, and Greco-Roman, literature and language is like the height of coolness, right? So that's the theme of this podcast, I'm realizing, is how cool I am. So cool.
So other than it making you cool, what do you really think drew you to that? Oh,
to classical studies.
Yeah.
The poetry, to be honest.
Interesting.
Had to take, I took Latin in high school because I knew that was going to help me on the SATs and to get into college and stuff. So I took Latin. So that was, the language that I was interested in, but we didn't read a lot of poetry. We just kind of read like the Latin textbook. And then I had to take I had to get a credit for something. And there was an epic poetry class, Greco-Roman epic poetry. And I was like, yeah, I'll take that. That's fine. Whatever. That'll be easy. I like reading. and I was like, are you serious? This is like the basis of Western storytelling. Yeah. And it's like bloody, and it's so much action, and there's so much adventure, and so much of this, they're not that exciting to read realistically, but there is just so much history embedded in those poems. And, I'd like read the Odyssey, and I had a copy of it in my car when I was a high schooler because I thought that would be a cool thing to do. I know. I'm really outing myself. I'm like deeply outing how awesome I was. But it was just like, this can always take me home. It was very like emblematic and theatrical, to be honest with you, very dramatic. But and all the other ones, like I hadn't read the Iliad, I hadn't read the Argonautica, I hadn't read, I hadn't read the Aeneid, I hadn't read any of the things that like came from this. I hadn't read the historical texts. And I was hooked, and I was like, yeah, Broadway is hard.
Yeah.
And this is, the act of translation too, right? Like I'm so drawn to that as a genre, and finding ways to represent meaning from other languages is just, it's such a rich vein, Yeah,
it is. And it, so I was a classics geek, not nearly as cool as you were. And it was pretty incredible. I had a writer friend of mine, Patrick McLean. He's been a friend. We've been friends since high school. He's a professional writer. And he said to me, he goes, all there is the Odyssey and the Iliad. He goes, everything after that, like literally everything after that, that's where it all started. And he's the one that got me to read both of them. And I was like, yeah, holy shit, he's right. Like it's all in here. It's amazing. And that can be used snobbishly. But when you talk about basic themes and things like that, like there wasn't anything like it before then. So, hats off to you, Homer. Like,
yeah, he did a good job. He did okay. Yeah. Well, and the fact that it's, it's oral tradition that he's like, it was, there's a lot of scholarship about who Homer was.
I have no idea who the hell that is.
It's multiple people, probably not all dudes. Maybe it was, but, there's Gilgamesh too. There's, there are other cultural touchstones that have kind of that same structure and approach to storytelling that is very rooted in religion and teaching people about how to be in the culture that they're in and stuff. And but yeah, the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's like it's some of our first experiences of what it means to set down a story in written language. And I was so taken. Yeah.
You make a really good point that I don't think I've ever heard, which is to a certain degree, that was a collection of probably centuries of storytelling and oral tradition.
Oh, yeah.
It may not have been the lightning in the bottle that sometimes it's sold as, because he was standing on the shoulders of literally generations of giants.
Absolutely. And there are so many little moments where if you close read these things and you've read them a bunch, you can be like, oh, wait a second. Why are we talking about Sarpedon in this way in this section? Like, oh, okay, somebody else is writing this, or somebody else has
got a different voice. Yeah.
It's really and reading different translations of it and stuff. It's just, I love it. I love it. Craig, I love it. And I'm glad to know that you're into it too.
Oh, I do. And it, that's something, and that's a whole nother podcast, but like, I have never had an opportunity. I barely speak Spanish. I barely speak English. I've never had that opportunity to read, poems or literature in a native language. And, that's another reason I envy my wife is my wife is fluent in Spanish, and she does that all the time. And she talks to me about it. Like it's just different. It's just different. There's some things that just don't translate.
Right.
And it makes a ton of sense. This was a segment about a podcast though.
Oh, right. Wait a minute.
So
it's called Little Oracles. So it has, roots
look at that.
In classical
bringing
studies.
It back, John Mulaney. Look at that. Bringing it all in.
My big brain is working tonight, Craig. It's really working.
But before we talk about the podcast, that's not the first time the brand started, right?
No.
So was it blog or Instagram? What came first?
So it was just a personal project that I was working on, a poetry-based project that was about these little kind of definitional fragments and, this like lexical kaleidoscope kind of a thing where we're looking at everyday words, like very workaday words like bone and sparrow and things like that. And creating little tiny poems that speak back to those words. So it's like one line of poetry. And this is a project that I was just like tinkering around with. And I didn't know what it was going to be.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my friend Peter, and he has this wonderful little shop here in downtown Seattle called Orcus Paley, and he hosts an art show every fall. And yeah, it's so cool. And he asked me, I'd been to the art shows before, and he knew that I was working on this project for a while, for a few years. And he asked me last fall if I could bring little oracles to his show. And so we kind of workshopped, because it was just little poetic fragments. And he's like, what could that be in the context of an art show? And so he kind of challenged me to rethink this thing that I'd been working on, which is really exciting, honestly, for any creator, I think, to have someone be like, yeah, this, but also something different. It can be kind of discouraging, I'm not going to lie, but in this case, it was great.
We won't talk about the other times.
Yeah, we won't talk about those other times. Make it macaroni and cheese, but cake. So he said, can you bring little oracles to the group show, this art exhibit that he curates? And I said, yeah. And I turned it into this digital exhibit. So it was a blog effectively. And every day during the art show, there was this like kind of triptych of little oracles, as it were. So we had one of the little poetic fragments. I had these small trios of Polaroid photos that I had taken of everyday stuff, like banana peels on a counter, or someone who carved pizza party in the sidewalk when the concrete was drying, and, a flower, things like that. And so these little fragments would be paired with this triptych of Polaroids. And then I also created some soundscapes that would bring it all together, right? So
That's super interesting.
It was really a fun project to do. It was a lot of work, but writing 17 little soundscapes was considerable. But
soundscapes are hard.
They are really hard, and they're they were most of them were musical. Most of them like had musical movement and tonality and stuff. Some of them were these weird like percussion experiments, which were super fun to make. But so it became this digital exhibit. And then I also created a physical piece that was at the shop that kind of encouraged people to go to the website, essentially. But it was a collection of all of the Polaroids in a grid.
Oh, cool.
So it became that. And then I started thinking, this is, October 2022. And I had wanted to start a podcast forever, Craig. Mm-hmm. I had wanted to start a podcast. To go back to your question about, because I've never met a microphone I didn't love. No.
Because I freaking love my own voice. I'm the same way.
No, seriously though, I always really loved listening to podcasts. I love, hearing people share their insights, and I loved hearing, I love learning things, about the world, or weird crimes that have happened, or, the audio dramas that exist in the world. And I was like, I feel like there's just, something that I want to help bring into existence. And, a lot of that is conversations with cool people on the podcast, or, thoughts about creativity. I've been in creative fields my whole life, my whole career. Yeah. And I feel like there's a mine there, and I can delve as deeply as I, need to in that mine. And so I thought, well, what if Little Oracles, its next iteration, was a podcast about creativity? And because it started as this little nugget of something creative that I wanted to do, this little project. And what if it could just have a trajectory of like slowly widening out, as it goes through this art phase where people are experiencing it, and then it becomes, its beautiful tree form.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm already getting the feeling, having listened from the very beginning, that you're following it as much as it's following you. Mm-hmm. And there's already a little bit of a journey happening from episode to episode, where I feel like I'm listening to you define what it's going to be, and that may never stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I would definitely say so, that it has a lot of room to grow and to change and become whatever it needs to be. You know, we're currently in season 2 of the podcast, and you know, it's a different theme. We're not focusing as much on, you know, definitional stuff and words and all of that. And it's more focused on play as it relates to a creative practice and experimentation and discovery, and how important that is for creatives to, you know, learn about their craft and to hone it and, you know, do all of those things that make it what it is. And I'm planning season 3, and it's going to be, with fingers crossed, it's going to be an even a different thing, that an evolution there that's going to be kind of exciting. So yeah, it's a labor of love, you know.
So you're already planning season 3, which means I want to talk about season 4.
Of course you do.
What will be the beginnings of season 4? So looking back on how season 2 and season 3 started to form, when do you start going? Because I'm sure there's many bowls out there and you end up picking one. Like, what is that process like?
So I think that it's a very similar experience to, you know, the creation of the Gentleman Bandit experience. I just sit around and I'm doing my thing in whatever season I'm in. And then suddenly I'm like, wait a minute, here we go. Eureka, that's it. And I start kind of noodling around on an idea about what it could be, like a structure, a framework, an armature. I don't know what I want to call it, but and then I feel like it's a situation where I kind of run it through the paces of what that structure could support. And, you know, maybe a couple of ideas for episodes, because Little Oracles has a few different episode types, right? So we've got our little reviews, which are the book reviews. Those are kind of the easy ones because I'm just reading books. I'm just reading books anyway. And then we also have our kind of more existential commentary episodes, where I just kind of pontificate about creative stuff, talk about what's going on in my creative life and those kinds of things. And then we also have our creative chat episodes, which are conversations that I am so thrilled and lucky to have with creative people in my life that are, I don't know, they're my lifeblood. They're so amazing. And I love those conversations. So I try to see like what different episodes of those types could fit into an armature that I might create. And I have not thought about season 4 at all. I have no idea. You know, maybe there isn't even a season 4. Maybe it's like all the great, you know, episode or series of television where it's 3 seasons and you're out. But I doubt that's what's going to happen. But but you know, there's like I said, there's always room to change and there's always room to grow, and like maybe it'll evolve into something else. You know, maybe it won't be a podcast. Maybe it'll be, I don't know.
Who knows?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm getting an impression here, and you're going to, by all means, Allison, go, Craig, like, have you even been listening? You don't even understand me. I'm getting the impression that you draft in your head a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And then it just all comes out at once.
Yes, absolutely.
Does that sound right?
Oh, yeah. I write in my head a lot. I do keep notes. I have a little notes app that I write things down in. If I have an idea for, I don't know, a poem, or I hear about a cool story about like phenotypic plasticity and holly trees or whatever, like I'm saving that because that's a poem right there. So I have a lot of like little ideas hanging around all the time. And I'm a very synthetic thinker. That doesn't sound quite right. Synthesis is the way that I think about things.
Those are two different words,
Those are two
Allison.
different words.
I'm like, I have no idea what the hell she's talking about.
So it's a very highbrow way of thinking about things.
So when you say synthesis, what do you mean by that?
So I'm always kind of drawing connections between and among different inputs that I have. So like the article about phenotypic plasticity that I'm reading in Science Magazine. Maybe that's going to find some kind of tie in with a game idea that I have about creating your own armor and changing your armor based on the kinds of traumas that you've experienced. I think I just wrote a new game. Hello.
Yeah.
I just came up with this idea. Thank you, Craig. So, it's just, there's just a lot of like, I don't know, like linking, I guess, going on in my brain. And so I think that you're absolutely right that I do draft a lot up there.
Yeah.
And then it's a deluge kind of that comes out.
And the reason I do that is because I think that's something I'm getting the feeling that's something you and I have in common. Right. So like my wife will get frustrated sometimes because she's like, honey, I would really love a bookcase. And I'm like, you know what? I've never built a bookcase. So how about if I just build a bookcase? Yeah. And then 4 months go by, 5 months go by. She's like, we kind of talked about you building a bookcase. You thinking, I'm like, I'm not there yet, hon. I'm not there yet. And what she doesn't see is that I've now built that build case like 15 times. Yeah. Right. So I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm building it in my head and building it in my head. And what happens with me, and this is like so much about all creativity, all of a sudden, like, then I go, okay, now I see it.
Yep. Yeah,
and
totally.
And then she gets mad at me because she'll be like, you've never done this before. And now it's like, this is pretty damn good for your first try. And I'm like, it's not my first try.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I get,
you're absolutely right. That is, I think that's one of the critical skills of being a creator, right? Is being able to sit around and not do anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that sounds kind of basic, kind of mundane, but it's so true. Like sometimes I just need to like sit and look out the window and imagine what the organization of my pantry could be before I sit down and take the hour and a half to do it. Like there's just a lot of things in life that it behooves people to just sit down and think about for a little while.
Yeah, but because my wife does not work that way, right? And part of the reason her and I are so happy together is because we have enough in common, but we're very different people, and it makes us discover each other all the time, over and over again. She doesn't iterate that way. She has to iterate by doing, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so her and I learn from each other because there's incredible value in the way she iterates and her creating. And which is she has to draft, she has to write, she has to build, she has to touch. Whereas I'm a little bit, I feel like you, like before this podcast, before we recorded today, I've been trying to figure out my backyard. So I got myself a tiller. I've never tilled before. And now I'm tilling my backyard. I don't know what I'm going to do with the goddamn thing. But like that during that time, I'm thinking about how will I run this game 4 months from now, right? And it's constantly like swarming. So, and the reason I bring that up is I understand what you're saying, but I think that for what listeners need to understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Allison, is that we're not just sitting staring out the window. There's like 15 things happening at a different layer in our brain. Am I making any sense?
No, you totally are. You totally are. And I think that I'm being a little poetic about that experience, right? Like, oh, I'm just looking out the window, and it's that's not the reality of the situation. Like I feel like everyone kind of is always like running the numbers, as it were, in the back of their head. Like, how could I accomplish this thing? What's my day going to look like tomorrow? What am I going to make for dinner? What am I going to do about the novel that I'm writing? Like there's all of these things that you're just kind of, I mean, it's the whole thing about like, you have your best ideas when you're in the shower, right?
Right.
Like
exactly.
That's just a thing. Everybody kind of knows that you suddenly are going to remove yourself from the active moment of creation. And you're going to take all of that back into your little reptile brain, and it's going to hang out there. And then while you're washing your hair, that's it. That's what's going to happen. You're going to, that's how I'm going to do that thing, And
that's where that synthesis happens, right? Where suddenly two things connect, three things connect, and it's just been building over time. All right. So tomorrow, you go grab some lunch in downtown Seattle. Woman walks up to you and is like, oh my God, are you Allison Arth? I'm halfway through season 2. what is the next thing that person could say to you that would make you feel really good about what you're making with Little Oracles?
I think that if they just said that it, helped them create something, or it gave them the push that they needed to start the creative project that they have. And I want to be really clear that creativity is accessible to everyone. Everyone is a creative person in some way. It is an egalitarian thing. It's not just related to, I'm a painter, I'm a poet, I'm a person who creates visual art, I'm a person who creates television, I'm a person who participates in those more artistic, and I'm doing that in quotes. You can't see me because this is a audio medium, but building a bookcase it's creative, right? Yep. Like you are solving a problem and you're figuring out how to make this thing. And, I just think it's so important to remember that creativity isn't just about going and putting something in the Met or whatever.
Yeah. I could not agree more. So I'm the oldest of four. And I was always the quote unquote creative one, right? Because I'm the one that painted and drew and wrote and played role-playing games when I was a kid. I was the creative one. So the second oldest, Corey, my brother, is a contractor. He builds custom homes.
Wow.
The level of creativity that he has, Allison, blows my goddamn mind.
I can't.
And I get angry. Because I'm like, no, I'm not he is as much, if not more creative than I'll ever be, because it comes out different. The way he expresses his creativity is he can look at a space and go, I think I can make this the master bathroom.
Oh my God. That skill is incredible.
I have no clue how that works.
I know.
Right? And then he does it, and I make him send me pictures because I'm amazed at that process, in the same way, like he watches my Twitch channel and goes, Craig, I don't know how you do that. I'm like, oh, that shit's easy. What you're doing, But I really think your points is super important, and it's a barrier that my wife struggles with because she has decided I'm the creative one.
Oh,
and I'm like, no,
Andrea, it's not true.
It's not. It's not. Like, goddamn, she went and threw clay with some friends, like one of those wine, and creativity things. She brought the freaking thing back today, and I'm like, holy shit, honey! Like you've never spun clay before, and look at this thing. And I just want to shake her and just say, like, this is you created something. And I think there's people listening that don't consider themselves creative, and they're wrong.
Yeah, I totally wholeheartedly agree with that, because everybody's got a creative bone in them.
Yep.
And you just got to find where it is, The
medium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just got to figure out. I mean, my parents, wonderful, wonderful people. They would be like, oh, you're so creative. You do all this stuff. And like, I mean, my mom taught high school English, and for 32 years, she's coming up with ways to enter a piece of literature for high school students in these lesson plans. Some of them. And she's making that happen. She's making dinner for the family and lunch and breakfast. Like she's making food for everyone. She's, an incredibly stylish person. So she knows how to put together an outfit and look amazing. Yeah. And like my dad knows how to fix literally anything. I am not kidding. This man he is like, he can truly fix anything. And, he's a sportsman, and he can figure out how to do things like physically in the world. And like, they don't necessarily consider themselves creative people, and they totally are, they're just that's the thing, right? Like everybody just needs their little push, right? Like everybody needs a little encouragement to say, no, you can do it. You can do it.
There's a thing I call the myth of talent. And at some point I might do a podcast about it, but I find that the myth of talent is bad in so many ways. Yes. And here's the two ways I see the myth of talent frustrating me. I'm going to tie it to what we were talking about first. Is it's a barrier where somebody goes, I'm talking about my buddy Patrick, who's a writer. Always, like, he's like, oh, I've never had a talent for drawing. And, I would say to Patrick, I'm like, well, that's because you don't draw.
Yes.
Right. And he just started drawing and forced himself to start drawing because I'm like, shut up. Like, stop talking to me about, that's like me telling you, Patrick, I can't write. And you're like, well, who the fuck knows? Because you don't write. Right. And he found it. He found how he drew. Oh. Right. And now he does draw.
I love
and
that.
Like, and it's not talent. Right. And the other edge of that is when people go, you're so talented, and not understanding that that's a discounting. It's not intended this way. And I want to be very clear. It's intended as a compliment, but it's a discounted compliment that's tied to the barrier I just talked about, which is creativity is time. And it's iteration, and it's doing it over and over and over again. And, when I look at things that I'm amazed by and hear things that I'm amazed by or watch something I'm amazed by, there's a shit ton of work and failure that happened long before this was put in front of me. And I hate hearing that.
Yeah. I love that so much. And, there are physical predispositions that, can give people an advantage. Like Rachmaninoff's fingers were like 9 feet long or something. So, he could like do a lot on a piano. So there are things like that, but that is in no way what should keep someone from wanting to learn to play the piano.
Right.
I can't reach the entire keyboard with my hands. Oh, I guess I better not even try. I am so delighted to hear that about your friend, that he's just picking up the pencil and he's picking up the markers and saying, yeah, let's do this. And there's something there too about, I feel like there's a confidence that gets instilled when we're young.
Yes.
Certainly.
That's so true.
When it's that is missing, there's a lot of chance that you're not going to grow up feeling like you can do that.
Yeah. And
you can just step back and say, you know what? I want to learn how to be a weaver or whatever, and like go and do it. There's kind of a breaking point there, I think, for a lot of people who didn't have someone always in their corner, whether it's a family member or a really good friend or a mentor of some kind, a teacher, maybe somebody saying, you can do it.
Gee, that's some really powerful stuff, Allison, because you're 100% right. I've always had, like, I had that with my mom. My mom was always my cheerleader. Right. And even though she's long past now, that's the voice. Yeah. That's the voice that gives me the hubris to go, like, and this is when I talk about things, creativity that I've picked up on my own, they always start with an incredible amount of hubris, which is I will see somebody play guitar and I'll go, I think I can do that. Yeah. Like the cockiest guy that's ever walked this planet. And so I'll go buy a guitar, and out of sheer pride and hubris, I will teach myself how to play guitar.
Now,
right?
Did you do this? Is this a real story?
It's a real story. Yeah. And in high school, like, and if I look at all my creative things throughout my life, because I'm notorious for hyper focusing on stuff, right? It was the same thing with sleight of hand magic.
Oh,
saw someone do sleight of hand magic one time, and I went, oh, that was really cool.
Right.
And then I was like, I think I can do that. And then I go down the rabbit hole. Right. And it's, that comes from having that voice. And I have people in my life that weren't as lucky as me. And that didn't have that person that go, yeah, you can do this. And we're laned early. So if you're listening, like, I'll be that voice for you, right? Like you can do this. You can freaking do this. If I'm an idiot and people listen to this stupid podcast, anybody can do this. But I've never thought about that before, Allison, that voice, and it could have been a minority voice in your whole life, just someone that said, you can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you that that little bit of juice, you know, and it's the thing that like I always go back to too. Like if I want to learn something new, I think back on all of the things in my life that I've learned that are new to me that I, you know, never knew how to do, and just think back about the people who always, you know, it was for me, it was my parents who always encouraged literally everything I did. You know, they were always there. They were always in my corner. Right. Yeah. And I feel so lucky, you know, because not everybody has that. And
it is luck, Allison. It's sheer luck, and not to take anything away from you, but you had nothing to do with that.
No.
You lucked out, right? And to be clear too, I'm a shitty guitar player. I'm not good at it. And that's okay too, right? Like, do I know how to play guitar? Yes. Am I good at it? No. Yeah. But that's okay too, right? That's all right. But I did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something.
Well, and if it makes you happy, right? Like you get joy out of that. And
every once in a while I walk by my guitar and pick it up and God damn it, I still know the chords.
Yeah.
Can I keep a rhythm for shit? No. But I can play Stairway to Heaven. So we're good.
See, there you go. That's all we need.
Yeah.
All you need is Robert Plant.
But it's what's important for a lot of people that enjoy that process. And to be clear too, Allison and I are talking about this, and I get a kinship with you, because I feel like we enjoy that journey of, I don't know shit about this, and I'm going to try this, and I'm going to learn about this, and I'm going to fail, and I'm going to go look at it some more and stuff. And I enjoy that process. There's a lot of people that don't enjoy that process, and that's okay too. Right.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of people that don't know whether they like that or not.
Right. I think you're right.
To tie back to what I think is a really neat thing about, and you do sometimes you're really super subtle about it, like in a mean way, that you are constantly poking your listeners to say, like, go do this. And I think it's a really neat strand that goes through the entire podcast.
Thank you. If you know, one of these podcasts can reach one person and have that person say, yeah, I can do it, then my job is done. I can die happy.
So you and I have, we have an overlay of people that have been on my podcast and been on your podcast. And we had a situation pop up where we had interviewed the Thin Places Radio creators at relatively close to the same time. And that prompted us. And then I heard your episode of it. And I was like, you know, not only is she really good at like doing a solo podcast, which I'm not sure I could do, to be honest with you. But then she does interviewing. Like I hear one of your first interviews on the podcast. I'm like, well, screw you. You're good at that too. But it got, you and I started a conversation about the process of interviewing, and we were like, okay, we got to stop because we should talk about this on the podcast. So what I want to know from you, because it's a very different when you have a guest on. So you are going to, when this comes out, you have already released your episode, but you haven't interviewed your friend who has the store in Seattle.
I have.
Right?
I have.
Oh, you have interviewed. Yeah. All right. So let's go back. Let's go back to that when you've already interviewed him. You just haven't released yet while we're recording this.
Right.
Let's go back though. So this is a person you've known in your life, right? You guys have talked many, many times without any microphones around.
Yes.
What do you do to prepare for the interview in that scenario?
Well, first of all, I definitely start with kind of an outline based on some chats that this person and I have had already. So in this case, because I know Peter so well, we worked together at the creative agency for years, and he was one of the people who hired me, actually. So
no kidding.
Yeah. And so we have done so many creative projects, and we were just kindred spirits from the jump. And we love sitting around and just like deep diving on what a word could possibly mean, you know, and it's just like it's very hippy dippy and stuff in that way. But I wanted to have Peter on the show because he is currently, he's working on these conversations that he does with visual artists for catalogs and for art shows and things like that. And he has a really cool process for creating those conversations that's multimedia, and it's audio, and it's, digital input through like Google Docs and things like that. It's transcription. It's all of these things. And we were just talking about like orality and literacy. And we were talking about how, how the interview or the interview format is kind of pressurized in a way that a conversation isn't as pressurized. And so we were just talking about this just in general, just in life. And I said, hey, Peter, do you want to be on my podcast to talk about this? And he was like, oh my God, that would be incredible. So so I put together kind of an outline based on the conversations that we'd had before and just, sent that to him. And we tooled around with it just in texts for a little while. And then I sent him like a formal thing. But yeah, it's really kind of about creating that structure. And I think that when you and I were chatting, the metaphor that I really like to use about this is, those questions are the safety net. They're not the tightrope. Right. So they're there to support, but they're not there to be the thing that I follow to get from one side to another. Right. Yep. And I think that's just kind of my North Star, if you will, when I'm thinking about having a conversation with somebody.
It's not call and response.
Yeah.
If it's anything, it's a prompt. Right. And all I'm doing is lighting the spark. And it's, you experienced it because we had it before we started recording. I have my little speech that I give all my guests. And what I tell my guests is your job is not to be interesting.
Yeah.
And I figured that out. And I say, that's my job, is to make you interesting. Right. And to allow you to be interesting. And what I found out early on when I started doing this is that I found that people were super self-conscious, that, I'm rambling and I've gotten off topic and I need to wrap this up and how much time is left. And what has worked for me is to, at the very beginning, go, that's my job. I got that covered. Right. If this is going to be a 45-minute episode or a 4-hour episode, I got it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'll decide that, and if we go, the best moments on my pod has always been the hard right turn where we end up talking like you and I've done it like 4 or 5 times already tonight. Yeah. Where we've ended up in a place that you and I didn't realize we were going to talk about. And those are going to be the gold, right? That's going to be the goal that we bring back to talking about the creative process, which is something that is a similar thing about our pods, which is a focus on that. But I completely agree that it's the safety net, right? It's the prompt, right? To use it in a role-playing game. So part of the reason I wanted to get into the interview business or change the format of my podcast more to interview podcasts is I get very angry listening to other interviews, like angry. And I'm angry at the person who's hosting the interview. When you're listening to interviews, what works for you and what have you found yourself using when you do interviewing?
Well, you are an excellent model in this case. I have to just give you some props. You're one of these people that you really listen to what people are saying. And that's that safety net versus tightrope thing, right? Like you're listening to what someone is saying. And if it's veering, it's taking that right turn, like you just said, you're like, okay, cool. And you're actually thinking about what you could ask in a follow-up question. You're thinking about not necessarily drawing someone back to an original question or to the next question on the list, but what's the next thing that I want to know about what this person just said? And that's, I think, what works for me the most when I'm listening to an interview or conversation-based podcast is someone who's actually like present and they're in the conversation with somebody, not somebody who's going to just, doggedly follow a script in a way. And, I think that the other thing too is I love it when hosts share like tidbits about themselves. If it is a conversation, like it's the tennis metaphor, right? Like it should be back and forth. And, I love hearing what the guest says about their experience or their life or their work or whatever it is, how that manifests in the host's life too, because they're a person too, like you're a real guy, right?
Right.
You're not synthetic like me.
Right. No, you're 100% right. And it's funny you say that because I get self-conscious about that, especially when I'm editing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll edit a podcast and an interview and I'm like, God, Craig, shut your fucking mouth. Like, stop talking. And so it makes me, but you're right. When I listen to other podcasts, I like to hear both sides of the conversation. And what'll happen, and I hope I do it, is that they take what the guest said, relate it to something that they did, and then they leave the listener, the third party, to go, okay, now I can kind of understand it, right? So it can be restating. So that makes me feel a little less self-conscious.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you just said about the listener as the kind of the third piece of that
it is
triangle, right? Like I have never actually thought about that before, that the listener is, as much a part of the podcast as the people or the person on it, that like they have a stake, and they have, even if they're not necessarily communicating what they're thinking about what they've just heard, they have that thing that they've just heard like rattling around in their brain, and they're thinking about it and osmosing it and manifesting it in different ways. And I love that. I love that, Craig.
It's super important, Allison, because, you and I are doing this because we enjoy each other's company. We enjoy each other's podcasts. And we're like, you know what? I'd love to talk for, an hour or two about this with you, Craig. Mm-hmm. Right. So like, we're good. Right. We're good.
Yeah.
The person listening right now has a shit ton of other things they could be doing right now.
Absolutely.
And not even getting into all of the other podcasts that they've been doing. And I think it's critical and a responsibility for us, both as a guest as well as a host, to give a reason to listen and make that a real thing. And I think part of that ties to what you talked about, which is, and I've done it a few times when you and I've been talking, which is someone says something and you can feel them going to the next thing because they understood what they just said about what they just said about. But you have to stop them and go, wait a minute. What does that mean? Right? What is that saying? And what you have to do is you have to listen. You have to, as the host has to be the listener too. I am the listener at the same time, and I have to intervene, and I have to jump there, and I have to go like, I'm sure this is really interesting for you to talk about, Allison, but I'm bored, which means my listener's bored. So we're going to have to like move on. Right. And you do have that responsibility as a host, but to your point, you have to listen to be able to do that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like in anything you ever read about how to do a good interview, it's just, it's like, listen to the person. It's number one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it ties to, a lot of other things too, like GMing and stuff.
Right.
All right. So originally I was going to take a break before we do this, but I think I'm going to roll right into which I've got to say is the part of this podcast that I've been super excited to talk to you about. It's the what you're grooving on. And we've done a little bit of it already. But one of the things that I love to do, Allison, when I'm talking to creative people is I like to find out from creatives what they consume. What is it that when you're not making, do you take in that you didn't make? So let's start. What is something recently that's gotten its hooks into you?
So I have a whole list of things to reference for you.
This sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah.
Have you met my friend John?
Yeah, I have met your friend John. I've met him a few times. Do people know that John and I are married to each other? I don't know.
I don't know if we've said that, but
John Harper and I are married to each other.
Spoiler.
I guess we should say that.
That's funny.
And we were not married when he GM'd my first role-playing game either. So
little did he know how much was at stake.
I know.
You were one critical fail away from.
That was it. So I guess maybe we'll start with books because we've kind of started there earlier, and we can then move into other types of media, I suppose. But some books that I absolutely love. It's more like authors that I really love. And I have this holy Irish trinity of these 3 women writers that I cannot get enough of. Now, I'm going to preface these by saying all 3 of these writers are incredibly lyrical writers, very much literary fiction writers, very much in the, very poetry adjacent in the way that they write. Some of them are actually poets. So Doreen Nigrofa, who wrote A Ghost in the Throat, which is a hybrid.
What a title.
I know,
my God.
I know.
What a title.
Yes. So this, I have little obsessive tendencies too, Craig. So when I read this book back in November, I read the book and then I listened to the audiobook and then I read the audiobook and the book at the same time. So I listened to the audiobook while I was reading. This is over the course of 3 days because I was like, I'm obsessed with this book. So
you and I have so much in common.
It's so amazing, right? Like this like ability to dive into something and just like, to eat it up is wonderful.
Covering.
So yes, exactly. So A Ghost in the Throat is this hybrid memoir, poetry, history thing that it's just, I adored this book. It was in my top reads of 2022 and probably the top reads of my life. I cannot stop thinking about this book. So it's about motherhood and it's about, the sacrificial feminine body. And it's about,
that's interesting.
It has to do with a very like 1700s Irish poem, Aquina, where a woman mourns the death of her husband and like drinks his blood when she finds his dead body.
Okay.
It's intense. It's so amazing, this book. And then also in my trinity is Emer McBride, who wrote A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing and The Lesser Bohemians.
Great title.
I know. Irish authors, they know what's going on with titles, I think. So she has this kind of tripping, beautiful poetic style. It's like you get lost in it. And I am not going to compare her to that really famous Irish author that everyone talks about having a very tripping style that doesn't always make sense because she's her own person. So wonderful work by Emer McBride. And then my third addition to the trinity is Claire Keegan, who is a short story writer. And she has a couple of little slim novellas. Small Things Like These is the novella that I was introduced to with her. And she has this like, it's certainly less lyrical and less effervescent in a way, I guess, or maybe ephemeral in the way that poetry can be. But it's so emotional and very spare in the writing. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff from these 3 women. And they're currently writing. So that's very exciting that they will keep creating.
Quick question. You've coupled them into this trinity, this Irish trinity. What do you understand about but they're about 3 different things. Yeah. Right. So what do you understand about the Irish experience now that you didn't before? What did you learn by reading the 3 of them?
This is such a good question. It's a hard one. I guess that's kind of what I learned. There is a lot of heartbreak, honestly, that really comes through in all 3 of these works, and a lot of processing of trauma that maybe it doesn't even get processed all the time. And there is a lot of shit that has been perpetrated by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
That's one of the other things that, I kind of knew that already, but these really just kind of brought it home. So I think I would, if people decide that they want to read these books, I would go into them with a a little bit of gentleness for yourself, because these are not easy books to read, honestly. Yeah. Like they have some abuse. They have, very intense, very intense experiences embedded in them, and like a lot of body based experiences and a lot of female body based experiences. Yeah. And so I think that there's that could
be too much for somebody.
It can be too much for some people. And, there is a lot of that embedded in them. But I love these authors, and I can't wait to read everything that they've written. It's very exciting for me. So
real quick though, how did you find them? Because that's another thing that's always interesting is that you knew nothing about them, and now they've become favorites. How do you discover?
So I read a lot of blogs about just like, they're kind of like lifestyle blogs, honestly, but there are places that I find recommendations for books there. But a lot of times it's just reading the Kirkus Review and reading I read the New Yorker. So like there's a lot of featured authors in the New Yorker.
You are fancy.
And I read the New Yorker.
And I understand all the cartoons.
I have the tote that I take to the grocery store. It's a pig in a hat saying, what is the Seinfeld cartoon with the pig? Oh, God. Anyway, and the Paris Review, obviously, there's a lot of places where I'm getting a lot of those recommendations, but certainly like I don't use Goodreads, but I lurk on Goodreads.
Sure.
So, and I follow a lot of bookstagrammers. So, there's a lot of people on Instagram who are, just constantly talking about what they're reading. And that's kind of how I go about it. I spend a lot of time looking at books, I guess.
Andrea has fallen in love with what she calls book talk.
Yeah.
She has found the TikTok. She's gone into that part of the algorithm where, people are recommending books, and she has found that to be just amazing.
Yeah. I haven't ventured into that. TikTok is too much of a fire hose for me right now. I get really, I'm too old. I just think I'm too old for it. Honestly, it's just, I can't process. So
it's too sweet for me. It's too much sweet candy. Cause I can find myself 30 minutes go by and I'm like, I have done nothing.
Yeah. But like we said, sometimes it's good to just sit around and do nothing.
Yeah. And I don't hold it against anybody that does it. Like my wife is a 2-screen person. My wife has a television show on and her phone going at once. And that's because her brain works different than mine. But I've stopped. Yeah. Like I've just let her do her thing now. Yeah. Yeah. And he just acknowledge the fact that our brains work different, and she loves TikTok more than I do.
Yeah, right.
All right. Fine. So we got books.
Yeah. So we got a couple of books. And then I also just wanted to call out a couple of my favorite poets that I really love. Victoria Chang, who wrote The Trees Witness Everything, and a book called Obit, which are really cool, very constrained works of poetry. So if people are into,
what's constrained mean? What do you mean
they actually have constriction on the composition. So, for example, Obit, every single poem in the collection of Obit is structured like an obituary. And they're not just obituaries for people, obviously. It's obituaries for like the toast that she dropped on the floor and, her sense of youthfulness and things like that. It's just a really cool way of being able to expand beyond the boundaries even when you have constraints, right? And then The Trees Witness Everything is kind of doubly constrained because each poem is constrained syllabically. So they're after wakas, which is a Japanese form or a set of Japanese forms. And so there are syllable requirements for these poems. And then also every poem borrows or lifts W.S. Merwin poem title. So it's so cool. I'm
amazed at all the shit I don't know. How cool is that?
The world is a broad and amazing place, Craig, right? Like there's so many things.
I didn't know any of that, and that all sounds really cool.
It's so cool. It's so cool.
It is.
Yeah. So those are just a few that I really love. Books is there. in terms of like visual media that comes into my eyeballs from a screen, we just finished season 3 of Dead to Me, which is Netflix show.
Have not watched this.
Oh,
Talk to me.
So Christina Applegate.
Love her.
And
God,
yes,
I love her.
I know. We all love her. And Linda Cardellini and James Marsden in,
Interesting.
I know, possibly his best role. So not that I've seen his entire oeuvre, but he is so good in the show.
He's so easy to be the picture in the frame, the picture that came with the frame. He can be that so easily, but he's good in this.
John, when we were watching season 3, he said, okay, so who is more uncanny, James Marsden or Chris Pine? Because I have this thing about Chris Pine. He's like just too handsome. He's like he's synthetic. He's like me.
That's really funny. And
I landed on the side of Chris Pine. I think that he's kind of the uncanny handsome man.
That's funny.
So
Dead to Me.
Dead to Me is it's one of these things that I find it hard to explain because I don't want to spoil anything. Right. So it is a show about 2 women who become unlikely friends because of a crime.
Okay.
And every episode, I think that structurally, every episode, that's what makes this show so exciting is that every episode is, there's cliffhangers and there's, reveals and there's really exciting stuff that happens within the context of this very like kind of suburban situation. Mm-hmm. And everything that happens in the show is something that you can imagine happening in real life. But the cascade of all of these things together is just outsized, and it is so well written, and I fell in love with this show. And John actually drew the comparison to Barry. It's very much in the Barry space of storytelling. So I think that originally when I first watched it, I described it as if Breaking Bad were written by women and about women, not to be like gender essentialist about anything, but like
no, what you're saying is 100% accurate though. Yeah.
So
and that takes nothing away from Breaking Bad, but it's definitely a male perspective.
Yeah. So, but I think John's perspective is even more apt. We hadn't watched Barry at that point, and we are so excited to watch. Speaking of things that we love, so excited to watch season 4. We thought it was only 3 seasons, and
you got a present.
Then we got a present. We got season 4 of Barry. So, so TV wise, that's been pretty exciting. I'm a pretty serial like movie watcher. Like I'll watch a movie to absolute death. Yeah. But we watched Nope not that long ago, and so wow, good. What a movie. What a movie.
Man. Oh, so good.
What a movie. So
yeah. And you can't watch it once.
No.
Because you're not going to catch it.
Yeah. So that was a really incredible piece of cinema that I was excited about. And, we watched it like the day after we watched Roadhouse. So, it was like a kind of the highs and the lows. You know what I mean?
Okay. Careful.
I love Roadhouse.
Okay,
I love Roadhouse. Do not come for me. I love Roadhouse.
Okay. Because it's a terrible movie and I love it.
Oh yeah. 100%. Big love. I just love Patrick Swayze so much. He's incredible. Yeah.
He, like you think about, especially now because, they're products of their time, but you think about like, Ghost.
Oh.
You think about Roadhouse.
Mm-hmm. You think about Dirty Dancing. Let's be real.
Dirty Dancing. And like, goddamn.
I know.
They're bad movies that are really good.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, have you seen Black Dog, Craig?
I have never heard of Black Dog.
His trucker movie?
No.
Let me make sure it's called Black Dog. Is it called Black Dog? Hang on. Let's make sure that I'm not telling tales out of school about Patrick Swayze. Do we have time for this?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So Patrick Swayze is a trucker who gets involved in one last job. And it is high flying adventure, and we learned a lot about trucking.
So honest question, because we're coming from the same space with Patrick Swayze. Am I okay that I have not seen that? Or do I need to track it down?
I think he's pretty good in it. Okay. He's Swayze. Like he carries it. The movie itself it's like lukewarm garbage. I'm not going to say it's hot garbage, but
lukewarm garbage. It's only been in the microwave for a minute.
but there's like lots of stunt work and lots of like driving peril and vehicle interdiction and stuff. So, that's always fun. So, those maybe not Black Dog so much, but those shows have been really exciting for me.
And Dead, I'm going to have to tell Andrea about Dead to Me. We're going to have to put that on our list because that sounds up her alley too.
It's so fantastic. It's so fantastic. So, but the thing that I really want to talk about with you, Craig, it's my podcast now. I'm hijacking. I want to talk about music with you.
Okay. I would love to talk about music with you.
You are a music hound.
I am.
And I am so excited to kind of get into those weeds.
All right.
Or reeds, perhaps. Music pun. I'm a nerd. So musically speaking, I know that you and I both have a love for Mr. Harold Styles.
We do.
Yeah. And he's been so exciting for me to discover because of, I think what it is about him is that he takes inputs from artists of yore, and he creates this like incredible mashup that I never see coming, because he like sounds like Paul Simon in one bar, and then he's got Prince coming in on another bar, and he's got, some of the songwriting techniques of Neil Young. He obviously sounds a lot like the Beatles at times. Yep. He's got a little bit of like that edge, like Aerosmithy kind of thing going on. I'm so tickled by what Harry Styles is doing. And also he just dresses so cool.
Yeah. God, you just put a quarter in me. And now I'm going to go.
Yeah.
So Watermelon Sugar was the first thing I'd heard. I had no idea. I forgot what's the boy band he came from the reality show.
Wait, you're blowing my mind here. What?
What was the boy band he came from?
I have
origins?
no idea.
Oh, stop it, Allison.
I have no idea.
You don't know.
I don't know anything about Harry Styles except his music.
That's obvious.
All I know is that Harry Styles is on my record player, and he rules.
So here's the thing. You don't realize how cool he is.
Wow.
So he started. Where is he? I'm going to edit all this out so I don't sound like an idiot. What was the name? So, English producer of America's Got Talent.
Simon Cowell?
Simon Cowell. So Simon Cowell is doing the British Has Got Talent. There is 4 or 5 of these boys at the time who audition and they're perfectly fine, but none of them make it. Right. So none of them make it very far. Some of them are, and there's like 30 people. Right. And some of them were there. They get cut very early. So it was X Factor. I lied to you. So Simon Cowell goes, I think like if we piece these 4 or 5 kids together, we might have something. So he creates the band One Direction, which is.
I'm having a moment right now. He was in One Direction.
He was. And so I think it's 5. I think it's 5 boys, and I knew nothing about One Direction, right? And I never listened to One Direction. I'm sure I had brushed by their songs, but really didn't know, right? So he's in One Direction, and there's this creation of this tiny, slightly unhinged fanship that latches onto Harry.
Really?
And he is literally just one of, like, in no way showcasing himself as any more talented than the rest of them.
Oh, my God.
Then he vanishes and then comes back, I don't know, 5-6 years later and puts out that first album.
What?
And anybody, like, all the fans are like, holy shit. But people like me who knew nothing about him, I distinctly remember hearing Watermelon Sugar for like the third time, wrote it off.
Yeah.
Third time, I was like, oh, wait a second. Like, there's something going on here.
Uh-huh.
So go to the album. I listened to that whole first album and I'm like, this guy's the real deal. And you captured it perfectly, which is he listens to music and understands music and is pulling from all the places. And and not everybody agrees with this. I think his brother in crime that does the exact same thing in a very different way as Childish Gambino does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They both, you can tell, are lovers of music and they pull it in. But for him to come out and not only is every song different, but the albums have been different.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
And they are pure talent. There's not a weak song on any of them. I'm unbelievably impressed by him. I've never seen him live, but I've seen clips of him. He is obviously incredibly live. I love the confidence in his style.
Yes.
The confidence just to say, I don't care. You can say I'm this, you can say I'm that, you can speculate. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do my thing.
Yeah.
And like, it's incredibly attractive and sexy. Like he just has an energy about him that it's amazing. And when the new album came out, I was kind of like, and it's the best album he's put out yet.
Oh, I agree. Harry's House is just, it's peak, you know, it's got just like, I mean, music from a sushi restaurant. Like, how do you come out on the front end of that album with that freaking song? With, you know, he's like scatting, he's doing all of these like beautiful harmonies, these like descending harmonies that are just delicious, you know. And he's got, I love that album so much. He's got a bit of the David Bowie, at least in his personal flair, I think.
Which I couldn't love more. Right.
Yep. And he's just, I don't know, I feel like he's just constantly reinventing himself. And, you know, I love that about him.
The way I always tell people is like, he's the real deal. Mm-hmm. So he's going to survive. So when people talk about this era of music, his name will survive the time, right? And it's that survival tendency where when people go, the 80s were better, the 70s were better, the 60s were better. No, that's only because the ones we talk about are the ones that survived. There was a lot of really bad music in the 70s, but we only know and remember the ones that survived, and Harry's going to survive.
Yeah,
he's going to make it, and I can't wait to see where he goes.
Yeah, me too. Excellent. Go ahead.
And one thing I love about him too is the first time I heard Harry's House, I didn't love it.
I had the same experience, Craig. I did like music from a sushi restaurant, but everything else I was like, okay. Matilda, is that the song? The beautiful ballad. But I was like, oh, this is a little bit too twee, a little bit too sweet for me. Like, I don't know, Harry, you're getting a little. Then I started listening to the lyrics.
Right.
And oh my God, he's powerhouse.
It is. And I love artists that do that to us, the artists that are on their journey and they put out music that isn't safe. And they say, you know what, you can come with me.
Right.
It's okay if you don't. And he's doing that. And that makes me very happy. And there's a lot of artists like that did that. And sometimes they lost me, but I was on the dock waving, going, you know what? I'm not digging you anymore, but you go. I'm so glad you're not putting out the same album. And like one of my all-time favorite bands is Tool. And they broke my heart because the album that they had been working on for 15 years sounded just like the one they put out 15 years before.
Wow.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? Because the journey that they had gone through album to album was part of what I loved about them is this incredible creative process they went through. And then for them to wait a decade to put out the same album again, it just broke my heart. Then you have somebody like Ani DeFranco, who like in college, like I couldn't get enough of her. And she ended up being one of the ones where I was like, I'm not digging where you are, but like, you go, girl.
Yeah.
Like you go do your thing. And every once in a while I'll check in and listen and I'll go, that's awesome. Keep going. This is not what I'm digging right now.
Yeah.
And that's great too.
You know, you're speaking my language when you talk about Ani DeFranco. You know, there's just something in her vocal presentation, right? Like the way that she actually pronounces things is very Tori Amos. You know, it's like in that space of where a word is just letters on a page until it becomes this new entire thing in the mouth of these singers. And, you know, there's just the way that they decide to create new syllables and new meaning within those expressions of those words that they're writing is just, I just love it. Tori Amos was like a huge influence on me. She's a big deal, right? Are you Tori Amos fan?
Oh yeah.
God, yeah. Like who isn't, right?
Yeah.
So she was a massive influence on me when I was growing up. And, you know, I used to perform her songs all the time at my little like show and stuff that I had when I was in high school. And there's something about her songwriting that is just fundamentally activating for me. That's a good word for
it. Yeah, that's a good word for it. She hits notes. She reaches in and she finds little strings inside of you and she plays them. Tori is amazing. What's incredible to me about Ani, and for me, I this is going to be a weird bucket, but stay with me. I put Ani, Neil Young, and Tom Waits in the same bucket, right? Because they do things with language and do things with phrasing and turn things on you in a way that nobody else does. And Dylan's at another level, but they're not doing what Dylan did, right? The three of them, Waits, Young, and Ani, just have a way to play with, like you listen to, what's the Ani, Superhero by Ani DeFranco. For those of you listening, if you've never listened to Superhero by Ani DeFranco, it's an incredible song, just lyrically, let alone musically. The other piece of Ani that I love is, and this is something that differentiates her from Tori and why I'm more of an Ani fan than a Tori fan. Like, so there's artists like Tori that I appreciate and acknowledge how great Tori is, but I'm a Ani fan. Right. And those two things can happen at the same time.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the rhythm and the sense of rhythm that Ani has that just.
Have you ever seen her live?
Oh my God, like 4 times.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And it's a true experience. It's a true experience. And yeah, she is something else, man. She is something else. I haven't thought about her in a while. Thank you.
Yeah. She's just, you know, I saw her years ago when I was in college and she came to my school and like, she was just, I had really never experienced that kind of energy on stage from a performer before. And like I'd seen other various bands and stuff growing up in the Seattle area, basically in the 90s and stuff. And she was just like, she was bouncing, you know, she was just having a great time and enjoying every moment of it. And that joy is just so exciting to see in a performer, right?
You can tell when this isn't just another show.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And she definitely put off that energy without a doubt. So what are some other, I'm totally loving this, talking about new music. So have you found any other like new artists that you get that same, just like this is the real deal feel?
Well, so John discovered this band called Calibro 35.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, they're an Italian band and they are making very different records, like across their entire canon. You're getting kind of like funky jams, like a Rockford Files style music. Yeah, I know. And then they have some stuff that is integrating rap into it, and they have stuff that feels like a movie score for a science fiction film. So they're really very, very broad ranging in their style, and they have a flautist who is just a monster on that flute. It's amazing. So that's been really fun. He's discovered some other folks like Monophonics, which is also kind of a groovy, funky.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I've not listened to them though.
Really good stuff. Really good. I think they're an Australian band, I want to say. But they're super fun. I have spent not enough time with Taylor Swift, but some time with Taylor Swift.
She's starting to win me over.
Is she?
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that is I'm finding her through my 9-year-old daughter. I'm finding how Taylor connects with Cecilia in a way that I don't know if her and Camille Cabello.
Camille Cabello.
Cabello, thank you.
Yeah.
Another artist that I never would have listened to. Camila Cabello. Yeah. Another artist that I never would have listened to, but who both Taylor Swift and her have connected with my daughter.
Yeah.
And her and I, every morning I take her to school, take her to the bus. Okay. And that's our 30 minutes every day, where it's just me and her. And we listen to music. That's what we share with each other. Right. And, Dad, will you play this? Dad, will you play that? And like, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of getting stuff like that is to go, their music is not for 51-year-old men.
No.
Which is what I am.
Yeah.
And as soon as you shed that and stop going, well, they're not Ani DeFranco, right? They're not, but that's not what they're trying to be either.
Yeah.
Both of them are very good. Like Taylor Swift's the real deal.
I know, she really is. And I mean, the whole world knows this. I don't think that we're treading any
breaking news.
You know what, guys? Taylor Swift is actually really good. So
watch that one.
Yeah. She's someone that I kind of, I don't want to say I wrote her off, but
it's easy to do.
It's like, I was like, okay, so she's super famous and, this is just me being old crotchety me and being like, oh, new music, whatever. But, Taylor is just like, she has this lyric, a
voice.
She has a voice. Yes. She like can write a lyric that I'm just like, oh, what? Yes, absolutely. It's just she really can milk the meaning out of an experience, and she understands like what it means to be heartbroken, I think, and she really understands what it means to feel comfortable in your own skin or uncomfortable in your own skin, and I really appreciate that about her, and I feel like it was it Paul McCartney that said. Somebody said she's the Paul McCartney of this generation. I doubt it was Paul McCartney who said it about himself.
Right. But that's a really interesting statement.
Yeah.
Right. Because
Billy Joel. It was Billy Joel. Billy Joel said she's the Paul McCartney of her generation.
What does he know?
Oh, do not malign Billy Joel in my presence.
I'm telling you right now, you and I probably could have an amazing 2-hour conversation about Billy Joel. And I think we would still be friends at the end, but I'm not sure.
I want to have this conversation. I want to get the tea and the toast about your feelings on Billy Joel.
But that's and I was making a joke. He's a super qualified person to say this, and I think there's something there because what that's building into is how people were like, oh, like either you're a Paul or a John, right? And John are the serious artists. And, what we were saying before, black turtlenecks and smoke a pack of cigarettes, and Paul is pop. And then you realize that like Paul McCartney is a genius, right? He was always really good at it. And one of my favorite things Paul McCartney ever did is, so one part of the reason the Beatles broke up is that John was getting very frustrated with him on Abbey Road, and just like stop with the pop. His response, as he goes solo, is to write another silly love song.
I know,
which has like 7 lyrics in it. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing song and one of the best FUs in the history of music. Silly Little Love Songs. That's the name of the song.
I mean, like, I don't know how exactly to parse John v. Paul within the actual structure of a song, right? Like, technically, Paul wrote Yesterday, but I doubt that's actually true. Like they're riffing off each other, they're learning things from each other, etc.
Yeah.
But I mean, can we talk about how Yesterday is one of the most beautiful musical pieces in the world? Like the structure of its melody, it vibrates something deep inside a human core And I don't know how to fully categorize that experience of hearing Yesterday. And oh my God, it's just such a beautiful song. Let me just make sure.
There's a reason it's survived, right? There's a reason it's lasted that long. And it, I was, if that isn't obvious by now, I'm a huge Beatles fan. That was one of my first discoveries in music was the Beatles. But yeah, Paul was, and the other person that I will jump to when I get someone makes the mistake of bringing up the Beatles around me is both Ringo and George.
Okay. So tell me.
The two of them never get the credit.
They don't.
And what's great is you talk to other drummers and other drummers go, Ringo was a phenomenal drummer.
Yeah.
Like a phenomenal drummer.
Yeah.
Which I don't know enough about drumming to be able to say that. Right. So I just know that tangentially.
Yeah.
But what's amazing to me about Ringo is how he kept that circus going.
Absolutely.
And he really did. And there's a good argument to say that the Beatles fell apart when Ringo gave up.
Oh, see, this is interesting because
it's super interesting.
Yeah. I would like to hear more about that, honestly, because I feel like, he was working really hard on the White Album. He's working really hard in Abbey Road. Those like long connected songs, like that is a huge lift. And to keep, like you said, keep the circus going, right? Like he knew how to get out of the way, with the exception of his solo at the very end of the White Album, which everyone loves. Everyone should love, but yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point. Well, especially about George too, because like, what a songwriter, right? Like, what a song. He didn't get the due. He wasn't in the right space, I feel, to really make his voice heard when he's among those titans of popular song, right?
Yeah. And what makes me happy for George is that he proved to everybody who didn't see it, he proved him when he went solo. Have you watched who's the director of the Lord of the Rings movies? I always forget his name.
Peter Jackson.
Peter Jackson. Have you watched the Peter Jackson HBO thing?
No, the Beatles thing?
It's like 20 hours.
Yes, I haven't watched it yet.
It is, if you love the Beatles and you have to watch it, you can't binge it because it is a lot of downtime. It could have been turned into 2 hours of like unbelievable shit. Wow. I'm glad it's not.
Peter Jackson, what a shock that he made a 20-hour thing that could have been 2.
Yeah, who could turn The Hobbit into 3 movies?
Who would have thought?
But if you love, part of what I've always loved about the Beatles is the dynamic of the 4 of them and then the passing personalities that happened around them in orbit and how the gravity of those personalities around the 4 of them. It really is interesting. And you said it well, like, we know Paul wrote Yesterday, but it's never that simple. And what's cool is you watch them create songs that you love in Abbey Road. You watch one of them come up and go, I'm playing with this. And then I'm playing with this a little bit. And it's like, like that's my juice, right? That's what I love doing. It's like learning how we go from sketch to final thing.
Yeah.
You got, like I said, but watch it in like hour segments.
Yeah, I definitely, it's one of those things that is on the perennially growing list of things to watch. But I was a Beatles fan from, aged 13. I think my mom had a tape of the White Album that some student of hers made. And she was like, here, listen to this. And I was like, oh my goodness gracious. What is this? This is incredible. And I'd been raised on a pretty steady diet of like classic rock and stuff from the 70s, like AM radio type stuff. And I heard the Beatles and I was like, okay, I'm going to be a songwriter. I could do this too. LOL.
There you go. Oh God. Well, I have to say, Allison, like, I feel like we've got like 7 other podcasts left in this. So we will definitely have to do that and talk some more. Everybody already knows this listening. We can scroll down Everything that we've talked about is in the links. She is, I know she's going to send me a list when I ask for it because she's the best. But just in general, Allison, if someone is super interested and they want to get more of your voice, where do they need to go?
So you can follow me on the social media. You can follow the podcast at Little Oracles on Instagram. You can check out the blog and the website at littleoracles.com. And then I also tweet as myself on Twitter at Arthograph, and that is ARTHOGRAPH.
I have been super looking forward to this, and I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much. I have one more thing to say. Sorry.
Please.
And you can find my games at AllisonArth.itch.io.
I forgot about that too.
I know. Games. What are those?
Right. But very quickly, I've got one more person to thank, and that's you listening. You've made it through this whole thing, and I appreciate you. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to Tabletop Talk and share it with your friends. Check out our content on YouTube and Twitch. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and stay updated on everything coming from Third Floor. All the links are in the show notes. Take care, floorheads.
I'm excited to talk about Harry Styles with you.
I've got a bad thing for him. like a bad thing. Yeah, we'll talk. Yeah, we'll talk about the third segment. Yeah. My wife makes so much fun of me.
Oh, really? Oh, jeez. We'll talk about it, but
in a very kind way. I think I'm about to turn 51, and I think Andrea loves that I still seek out new music.
New music, yeah.
And but that doesn't stop her from poking fun of me, which is probably why I married her. So, all right, I'm going to bring us back. Okay. I'm going to let this segment be as long as you want.
Okay.
So you can go as deep into this as you want, or we can get to Little Oracles faster. That's completely up to you.
Sure.
I'm going to let you drive. Okay.
Okay. Actually, can we take a step back? When do you think this is going to be airing?
Total flexibility.
Okay. Because I have an interview with him that I'm posting in 2 weeks. It's not going to be before 2 weeks, right?
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah, like I said, I have total flexibility. So, yeah, go ahead and plug it.
Cool. I'm going to rewind. There we go. It's dinner time.
Go take care of that. I remember the question. Okay. I'll see. I'm going to stop the recording and start a new one. I'll see you in a couple.
Okay. Feline interdiction.
Is everybody okay?
Yeah, everybody's fine.
All right.
Jesus.
So funny. All right, so the setup is somebody you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
Like, how do you walk in and how do you prepare for I'm now going to interview them?
Well, first of all,
Oh, hey, are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care.